Hi Tony, thanks for the footage and good to start working with you on your game. I'm just going to go through your swing from maybe definitely P1 to P6, maybe a little bit further into impact, but by and large it'll be predominantly P1 to P6. Clear up a few areas that you touched on in your email. Basic understanding of the system is obviously very good. The trick is to prioritise what's required for yourself, hence the online session. And there are a couple of areas that I want to mention that you may or may not be aware of, and obviously the subsequent impact that they have on your overall shot pattern. So first at P1, in relation to the type of miss that you've historically had, I would definitely be considering your left-hand grip. It's a little bit strong for anybody who's had a tendency to hook the ball, and also for anybody who makes the type of moves that you make in the takeaway and in the transition. So I would look to just rotate the left hand a little bit less in a clockwise direction at P1, feeling maybe rather than the 45-ish rotated left hand grip, move it a little bit more, 30, maybe 25 rotated. So a few less knuckles showing on the left hand would not be a bad thing to start with. In relation to your original takeaway, and one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of that strong left hand grip for you is that you do sort of keep the club face relatively square, if anything slightly closed to the arc during the takeaway, so you sort of work the knuckles under. Now, working the knuckles under and getting that lead wrist to bow in the takeaway is great, unless you're, the only real exception would be Dustin Johnson. If you look at most of the guys who make that move, they tend to have a slightly weaker, more palm-orientated lead hand grip. Whereas in your case, you've got a little bit more of a sort of Mac O'Grady style of grip, which is great. I've no issue with that whatsoever, but it doesn't tend to lend itself to being sort of rolled under, lead wrist bowed during the takeaway. So I would just weaken that left hand grip a fraction. I've no real issue with your takeaway in regards to rolling the hand or bowing the lead wrist, as long as it sort of is done with an appropriate grip. You can find players who do it with a stronger grip, but in the large, guys who make that move with the lead wrist bows tend to have a slightly weaker grip. Guys who have a very strong grip and do that, someone like DJ, have to move in a tremendously dynamic manner coming through the hit to make it work and not hook the ball to the left. So that would be an appropriate change. You mentioned, you can see there clearly that your head drops and goes forward within the box, and you mentioned that you didn't have that extension piece. Whenever you see the head dipping in the box, P1 to P2, it's a case that the knees are changing flex too quickly. So whilst we are extending, we're side bending at too high a rate. So the rate at which you do things is very, very important. I'm going to put some numbers on that trail leg for you to clear this up. If you have approximately 25 degrees of bend in the trail leg at P1, by P2, I'd like to see that diminished by 6 degrees. So from 25 to 19, then from P2 to P3, a further 6, so from 19 to 13, and then from P3 to P4, a further 6, so from 13 to 7. So starting off at 25, straightening to 19, straightening to 13, strengthening to 7. Now you'll find that the latter part of the swing will be easier for you to manage, so primarily you just need to focus P1 to P2 rather than straightening the right leg out very quickly, flexing the lead leg a tremendous amount, creating a big gap between the knees, P1 to P2. Just feel a little bit less of that. Now, when I say feel a little bit less of that, anybody who straightens and flexes the knees as excessively as that, P1 to P2, will tend to find that the pressure, which is what you're feeling during that move, is moving in that manner. So there's a lot of pressure going into the trail heel and the lead toes very quickly. So if you felt that that pressure shift happened a little bit less from P1 to P2, that could be a feel for you that would help keep your head a little bit more stable, get the lead shoulder working down in a little bit more of an appropriate manner. Allied to a slightly weaker grip would see a club face that was a little bit less hooded. Then as we get to the top of the backswing, we would start to look less across the line. So club face a little bit shut, that can work, that's not an issue. Across the line is not ideal because what it then leads to is that steepening or steeper looking shaft at P5. So at P5, I would want to see your shaft, rather than sitting high up and just below the shoulder, just encroaching onto the bicep, I would want to see it more mid-bicep. Now part of that is keeping the lead arm in a little bit more at P5. But being across the line means that you're more internally rotated than you would want to be. And what you're finding is that as the hands then come down the elbow plane line, which is fine, the lack of external rotation means that the shaft sits a little bit high. And what you then do is you use your linear motion of the pelvis, so the hips slide this way excessively and the lead knee drives towards the ball excessively. You can see the knee passing its original address position considerably. So you're tucking under too fast, you're sliding towards the target too fast, and you use those two pieces to get the club on the inside. Now when you do that, the chest is pulling away from the ball. The head is starting to work backwards and upwards as you come into impact. You see that face on. Even though it's not back of its original spot, it is moving backwards as you're hitting the ball. Hips are tucking under too fast, knees driving at the ball too quick. And all of that is because you're trying to make up for the position you're in here at P5. So I'm going to get rid of all those lines for us now. Driving the knee, pulling away with the chest, sliding the pelvis excessively is a shallowing out component. And whilst we want to be shallower coming into the ball, in your case we need to be deeper and shallower earlier so that we don't have to drive as hard and slide as hard. And because you're working on it, it's very, very difficult to rotate through at the correct rate. The hands start to rotate too fast. The rate of closure can be high, not necessarily in this instance, but can be high. The reason you're down and you feel like you've no extension is, I mean, you've dropped in the backswing. During the backswing, you lose some height and then you stay in that low down position. So you're lowering the base of the arc, courtesy of what you've done in the backswing. You're certainly not lacking extension, so to speak, on the way through. Chest definitely pulls away from the ball. Difficult to push up out of the ground correctly when you're driving the knee towards the ball so much and the right heel's lifting off the ground so much, as you can see here, which is a certain sign of excessive extension and knee drive. So you remember, as you can be extending in some areas and flexing in others. So, you know, extension on the way through is a general concept, but we see some players who tuck the hips under really quickly, extend the lower body really fast, and then flex forward with the upper body. We see some players pulling the chest away from the ball whilst maintaining the flex in the knees. All these variations can take place. So in your case, backswing does need to be stabilised, but the transition needs to be calmed down as well. So what I'm going to suggest is that you do a very straightforward and simple drill for me for about a week to 10 days. And then what I'd like you to do is send me some footage. So I'm going to do this lesson in 2 parts for you. I want some footage of you doing the drill, and I'd like some footage of you making a swing after working on the drill for a week to 10 days. So the drill that I want you to do We've obviously talked about the grip change at P1. Other than that, I don't want you to change anything else. Overall, it's a task-driven exercise. It's putting you in a position where you cannot do a lot of the stuff that you would normally do. So it's going to feel quite uncomfortable. You're going to draw the right foot back so that it is well behind the lead foot. So ideally, I'd want the trail toe to be behind the lead heel. Now this online is called a boulder drill, but you're going to adapt this slightly. So normally you'd see the player taking his normal stance, pulling the right foot back so that the toe end is behind the heel of the lead foot and swinging away. What you're going to do is you're going to put yourself, I'm just going to adapt this, on the toe end of your trail foot. So you're going to pull this trail leg back and you're going to put yourself right on the toe end of this trail foot. Now what I'd suggest you do is you start off with some small swings when you're doing this. Any excessive side bending, extending, rotating, sliding you're gonna get caught out with this drill because you're not in a stable enough position to do anything excessively. So you're gonna start to do things a little bit more incrementally. You will start to get some different feels. I appreciate that. I've not got an issue with that. Whatever you feel, you feel. As you start to do this drill, I'd like you to send me some footage as soon as possible so that I can make sure you're doing the drill correctly. After a week or so of doing the drill, that's when I want the footage of you making a normal swing after working on the drill for say 10-15 minutes. So do a few drill swings and then say, right, I'm going to film this one, send it over to Darren, and then what I want to do is do an analysis or a split screen from this footage compared to that footage so that you can start to see some of the benefits that that drill is producing. Now I'm just going to have a quick look at your through swing now and give you some basic advice. As you're doing this drill with the right foot drawn back, I want you to feel like you're stopping at P9. So when the right arm is parallel with the ground, both arms are pointing down the range, lead arm will be angled in across your chest by about 20 to 30 degrees. So rather than, I don't want your arms and the club pointing down the range,